versus the Russian hoax. We were just talking about the letter, the Emmett Flood letter, and Emmett Flood is the counsel to the president, and he's complaining about the nature and substance of the Mueller report. If you're just joining us, make sure you go back and watch part 1. We're halfway through the letter. And I just finished talking about how this type of report that was released by Mueller has no basis in the relevant regulation and no precedent in the history of special independent counsel investigation. It goes on to say an investigation of the president under a regulation that clearly specifies, this is a regulation that allows a special counsel to be appointed, that clearly specifies a very particular form of closing documentation, is not the place for indulging creative departures from governing law. Under general prosecutorial principles and under the special counsel's regulations specific language, prosecutors are to speak publicly through indictments or confidentially in declination memorandum. That's repeating the point. If you are going to indict, then you state, we are going to indict the president because we believe he committed the following issues, or did the following things. Now it's public. That is your public statement that he's done these things wrong, and we're going to indict him. And the way the justice system works is now the president has the ability to say, I didn't do it, or defend himself, or just to plead guilty. That's the one thing that you can do. You can publicly state your indictment, or confidentially in declination memorandum, meaning we're not going to prosecute. End of story. You don't say, but we found all this stuff, and there's all this, and there's 182 pages, and isn't he a bad guy, but we're not going to do anything. You either publicly indict or confidentially decline to indict. By way of justifying this departure, writes Flood, it has been suggested that the report was written with the intent of providing Congress with some type of roadmap, as I had said, for congressional action. If this was in fact the special counsel's intention, it too serves as additional evidence of the special counsel's refusal to follow applicable law. In other words, he skirted the law in order to get a document out there that was not going to indict, but was going to give a roadmap to the Democrats to go after the president. Both the language and the regulation and its legislative history make plain that the closing documentation language was promulgated for the specific purpose of preventing the creation of this sort of final report. Under a constitution of separated powers, inferior Article 2 officers should not be in the business, meaning Mueller, of creating roadmaps for the purpose of transmitting them to Article 1 committees. With the release of the special counsel's report, and despite all the foregoing, the president, this is now we're getting into the president's ability to claim privilege. The president has followed through on his consistent promise of transparency. He encouraged every White House staffer to cooperate fully with the special counsel, and as far as we are aware, all have done so. Voluntary interviewees, including the counsel to the president, that's the important one, McGahn, 2 chiefs of staff, the press secretary, and numerous others. In addition, approximately 1.4 million pages of documents were provided to the special counsel. This voluntary cooperation was given under the understanding that the information gathered directly from the White House or White House staffers and having to do with presidential communications, White House deliberations, law enforcement information, and perhaps other matters may be subject to a potential claim of executive privilege, and for that reason would be treated so by the special counsel or presumptively privileged. Remember, the special counsel, the Department of Justice, all belong to the executive branch of government. They don't report to Congress. They report to the president, the attorney general, and the special counsel. Volume 2 of the report, which is the part about obstruction of justice, contains a great deal of presumptively privileged information. All these conversations that Trump had with McGahn, that they just documented in there for no reason other than just to get them out into the public. There's a lot of that type of information in those 182 pages, largely in the form of references to and descriptions of White House staff interviews with the special counsel. It also includes reference to presumptively privileged documentary materials. The president is aware that had he chosen to do so, he could have withheld such information on executive privilege grounds, basing such an assertion on the established principle that to permit release of such information might have a chilling effect on presidential advisors, causing them to be less than fully frank in providing advice to the president. Notwithstanding his right to assert such privilege, and with the measure of reluctance born of concern for future presidents and their advisors, the president has in this instance elected not to assert executive privilege over any of the presumptively privileged portions of the report. As a consequence, not a single redaction in the report was done on the advice or at the direction of the White House. So what Emmett Flood here, counsel to the president, is saying is that up till now, we've allowed you to carry on with this. And we've allowed you to, we haven't claimed any privilege, but they probably should have. But then there would have been a public relations disaster that Mueller wanted to release a report, and what's he hiding? But the point is, as Flood makes perfectly clear in the letter, he should not have written all this stuff. And as I said, Barr should not have accepted a report that contained all this information. This all should have just been background information, because if it didn't lead to either an indictment, then it should have led to a declination. He shouldn't have said, here's all the information, you do what you want, but make sure it gets in the public eye. And I'm not happy about the way it got in the public eye, because you didn't put summaries, and the media is not really reacting to this in the way that I want it to be. Obviously, Mueller is playing politics in this. Okay, as a consequence, not a single redaction of the report was done on the advice or at the direction of the White House. Now, here's where we're going to get into the tricky part about what's going to happen next. The president, therefore, wants the following features of his decision to be known and understood. Now, he's writing this to Barr. This is Flood, counsel to the president, writing to the Attorney General Barr, whom Mueller reported to Barr. Just keep that in mind. His decision not to assert privilege is not a waiver of executive privilege or any other material or for any other purpose. So he's saying, yeah, I gave you I didn't waive the privilege going forward. Not everything is fair game from now on. You're not going to get to talk to them again, and we're not going to allow the Congress to start cross-examining people on the basis of what they might have said or thought they had said or reported to have said in the Mueller report in those 182 pages. Because that's exactly why Mueller put it out there. So now there's 182 pages of a roadmap that he decided he wasn't going to get Trump on or make a prosecutorial judgment to indict him on obstruction of justice. But hey, Congress, have at it. Go ahead and investigate. Well, what the Emmett Flood letter is saying is, you're not going to get a chance to do that because we're now going to assert executive privilege over this. Barr should have stopped this in the first place. These 182 pages never should have been published. His decision to permit disclosure of executive privilege portions of the report does not waive any privileges or protections for the special counsel's underlying investigative materials. For example, FBI Form 302, witness interview summaries, and the presumptively privileged documents made available to the special counsel by the White House. Stop. Now, what's important here is we mentioned how the Mueller report is done from the perspective, finished meaning from the perspective of Russian collusion. It is not done, but it pretty much is done when Barr said with Rosenstein that we're not going to have an obstruction of justice case here. In order to keep it lingering, Mueller purposely released a report with 182 pages that said, well, he might have obstructed justice. We didn't think he did. We're not sure he did, but have at it. That is what the Democrats are still focused on in order to keep the last remnants of their 2.5-year plan to knock down Trump on Russian collusion and obstruction of justice. They don't have much left. But now Trump is saying, I'm going to cut off what you may have left there. And you can yell and scream and complain. There's a cover-up, obstruction of justice, because that's what they're going to do. They figure either they get to interview people where Trump will waive the executive privilege and then they can nail him somehow and say something happened there that was obstruction of justice. Or if Trump, and they know he will, and this letter makes it very clear, if Trump claims executive privilege, then they could say, oh, there's a cover-up. But here's the problem with that. Yeah, they might try to keep that issue lingering, but there will be an avalanche of, or I called it a tidal wave about 18 months ago, of information that at some point will come out that'll bury this as a minor footnote. And that is all the information that Trump is going to release that is declassified information about the Pfizer warrants, the 302s. He says he's got other information that people haven't even seen yet. And all of it's going to indicate that he was set up by the FBI, the CIA. They spied on his campaign. They never notified him that they thought there was some type of interference. They could have easily told Giuliani and Chris Christie, who are both at full security clearance, that there may be a problem with the Russians trying to infiltrate the campaign. As it turns out, it looks like the so-called Russians that try to infiltrate the campaign were actually FBI assets that they try to put in the campaign so they can then make contact with Russians and say, look, see, there was some type of connection with the Russians. As the report shows, Mueller said there were attempts made, but none of the Trump campaign had colluded or conspired with the Russians. Now, let's go on further, because now in the letter, we're almost done, is Flood is saying that there's not going to be any waiver of executive privilege anymore. We're going to claim executive privilege. His decision does not affect his ability as president to instruct his advisors to decline to appear before congressional committees to answer questions on the same subject. Meaning, if they have anything to do with me and you talked about them in those 182 pages and it makes me look bad, and now because of that roadmap that you wrote, Bob Mueller, and you're now going to, the Congress has it, and they're now going to want to interview those people and try to make the case public spectacle that look what Trump is doing. We're not going to allow it. And remember, this is a letter from the President's Counsel, Flood, to the Attorney General, Bill Barr. So first of all, he made the point that the entire report was not properly drafted in accordance with law. And now he's saying, even though you did that and we had waived privilege, we're finished. We're not cooperating anymore because we see the political nature of the document that you drafted, and you're through. You're through here. There's no collusion, no obstruction, and everything now is privileged from now on. And that'll clear the way for releasing all of the confidential information and declassify all the information that actually turns the whole investigation back towards the investigators. It's one thing for the president, Flood goes on, to encourage complete cooperation and transparency in a criminal investigation conducted largely within the executive branch, which means, as I mentioned, that Mueller and Barr all report to the president, they're part of the executive branch. But it's something entirely different to allow his advisors to appear before Congress, which is a separate branch of government, a coordinate branch of government, and answer questions relating to their communications with the president and with each other. The former course reflected the president's recognition of the importance of promoting cooperation for a criminal investigation. The latter course creates profound separation of power concerns and issues, and if not defended aggressively, meaning claiming executive privilege, threatens to undermine the integrity of executive branch deliberations, meaning they're going to talk amongst themselves. They don't want all this to come out into the public sphere in the Congress. The president is determined to protect from congressional scrutiny not only the advice rendered by his own advisors, but also by advisors to future presidents. So, Flood is laying down a marker. A, that this report and this special counsel did not do his job in accordance with the law by creating all of this extraneous information designed to be a roadmap to give to the Democrats so they can try to go after the president. His job was either to make an indictment or decline to make an indictment, not to provide 182 pages of why he didn't make an indictment. Secondly, that now that information has been provided and shouldn't have been publicly released, they're not going to carry on. At least what Flood is saying is at least that was all information that was within the executive branch, meaning the special counsel, the attorney general. But now we're not going to allow further presidentially privileged information and people to go to the Congress. A great deal is said these days about the rule of law and importance of legal norms. That's what all this is about. Starting with Comey's decision publicly not to indict Hillary Clinton, but to explain everything that she did wrong. That was the beginning and possibly the what they're accusing them of fixing or putting the thumb on the scale to make sure that Hillary Clinton did not get indicted. That is one of the problems with, they're saying, not following the rule of law. And that's continued, right? It's still continuing, the fact that the Mueller report did not just say no collusion, no obstruction. It said no collusion, but you're not going to rule on obstruction, but we're going to give you 182 pages of stuff and you guys can have at it. Definitely not part of legal norms. In that spirit, and mindful of the frenzied atmosphere of the accompanying the report's release, the following should not be forgotten, says Flood. Government officials with access to classified information derived from counterintelligence investigation and from classified intelligence intercepts engaged in a campaign of illegal leaks against the president. Many of those leaks were felonies. Now he's getting to the point now. This is where the tables turn. There's been a lot of leaking from the FBI and Congress. And Barr is saying I'm aware. Flood is saying we're aware of this. The president is aware of this. And they're telling Barr, get on it. Many of these leaks were felonies. Comey's leaks might have been felonies. They disclosed the identity of a U.S. person in violation of his civil rights. They misused intelligence for partisan political purposes, and they eroded public confidence in the integrity and partiality of our intelligence services. Another point, the total partiality of some of the statements that we've seen in the congressional testimonies and in the text messages between Strzok and Page and also McCabe. The criminal investigation began with a breach of confidentiality executed by a very senior administration official who himself was an intelligence service chief. The leak of confidential information personally directed by the former director of the FBI, Comey, triggered the creation of the special counsel itself, precisely as he intended to do so. If you remember, if you go back to early 2017, Trump fires Comey. Comey then takes notes of the meeting that he has. He then leaks them to a friend of his so that they can leak them to the Washington Post, the New York Times, and then he testifies before Congress that he actually did this, that he leaked this stuff on purpose specifically to get a special counsel. His job as FBI director is not to make sure that there is a special counsel against the president who fired him. Not so long ago, the idea that a law enforcement official might provide the press with confidential government information, which is what Comey did through a friend of his, for the proclaimed purpose, he testified to Congress to this, of promoting a criminal investigation of an identified individual would have troubled Americans of all political persuasions. This is the same thing with that law, the California law, that specifically is designed to target Trump. That's exactly what Comey did, and they got a special counsel because they were targeting Trump. That the head of our country's top law enforcement agency, Comey, has actually done so to the President of the United States should frighten every friend of individual liberty. Under our system of government, unelected of executive branch officers, which is what Comey was, an intelligence agency personnel are supposed to answer to the person elected by the people, the president, and not the other way around. Bingo star. This is not a Democratic or Republican issue. It is a matter of having government responsible to the people, and again, not the other way around. In the partisan commotion surrounding the released report, it would be well to remember what can be done to a president can be done to any of us. Think of it that. These leaks and this investigation also caused immense and continuing interference with the functioning of the executive branch. Our Constitution makes the president the sole constitutional officer for whom the entire nation votes and who represents this entire nation both domestically and abroad. As a result, interference with the president's ability to carry out his public responsibility is constitutionally equivalent to interference with the ability of the entirety of the Congress or judicial branch to carry out its public obligations. It is inarguable that the now resolved allegation of, quote, Russian collusion, close quote, placed a cloud over the presidency that had only begun to lift in recent weeks. The pendency of the special counsel's investigation plainly interfered with the president's ability to carry out his public responsibilities to serve the American people and to govern effectively. These very public and widely felt consequences flowed from and were fueled by improper disclosures by senior government officials with access to classified information. Again, telling Barr, here's where to look. Go get those leakers. That this continues to go largely unremarked should worry all civil libertarians, all supporters of the investigative due process, and all believers in limited and effective government under the Constitution. I respectfully ask you to include a copy of this letter in the department's records relating to the Supreme Court counsel's investigation. So, what the President's Counsel did was put down a marker and said that this was basically an illegal report. They're not getting into whether it should have ever happened in the first place, but they also say that we had illegal leakers that caused the creation of the special counsel. So this report is talking about why they should finish with this whole thing here. We're done. You had your shot. You went through the process. It was illegally started through a leak by Comey. You made your report. You did the report not in compliance with the regulation. You put those 182 pages out. And now it's time to stop this, because we are going to claim executive privilege, and we're not going to allow this to carry on. But the note to Barr is, let's find out about the leakers. And this paves the way for Trump to now release all of the documents that shows everything that they had done wrong. And had he done it earlier, they would have said releasing those documents themselves would have been an obstruction of justice. That's why I said months ago, he should wait till all this is over. If they indict him, he can use it to say it was a bunch of nonsense and the indictment is false. And that's why they probably didn't indict him, because they knew we had this information. And now that it's over, release the information. All right, let's see what you guys are saying. If you're just joining, we got cut off inexplicably. You have to go back and listen to part 1 of this YouTube, and then you can follow along. All right. Let's see. And if you guys have any questions. Yeah, Roger says the Russians cut the stream. I don't think it would be the Russians. All right. Anything else? All right. I think all the questions we might have had were in part 1. So I will look at those tonight. And I want to thank everyone for joining me. Remember, tomorrow night will be Saturday Night Silver with Smaulgld. And Sunday will be Solid Gold Sunday with Smaulgld and possibly Seamus. Fiona asks, Smaulgld, have you heard anything about Flynn? It dawned on me that he was supposed to have a court appearance in March. No, I haven't. That eventually will come out. All right, guys. Thank you very much for joining me. Sorry for the interruption there. This report, it was called Mueller Report versus the Russian Hoax Part 2. Part 1, I try to splice them together properly. If you go back and listen to Part 1, you should be able to make sense of the Emmett Flood letter to Attorney General Barr on the Mueller Report. Thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow, Saturday Night Silver with Smaulgld.